What if I told you that everything you believed when looking at the luxurious facades of old buildings is not true? We are accustomed to perceiving Victorian mansions as symbols of comfort, wealth, and unshakable traditions, where life flowed steadily and serenely. We are shown spacious halls with fireplaces, heavy velvet curtains, and exquisite candlelit dinners, creating an idealized picture of the past. However, behind this magnificent facade lay a completely different reality, full of physical deprivation, harsh restrictions, and endless cold. It was a life subject to the strictest regulations, where every step was controlled by unwritten laws, and comfort was only an expensive illusion. The daily life of the owners of these houses was an endless struggle with domestic inconveniences that would seem unbearable to modern people. Engineers of the time created incredibly complex systems that often turned the house into a dangerous trap or an ice cave. Huge spaces required enormous resources to maintain, turning the owner into a hostage of their own property. Behind the closed doors of bedrooms and offices, dramas unfolded that were not related to feelings, but to the simple impossibility of keeping warm or washing. Even the air in these rooms was saturated with invisible threats that the residents could only guess at. It was a system that squeezed the life out of both servants and owners, requiring constant financial investment and physical effort. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how an invisible army of people and tons of coal saved the inhabitants of these palaces from freezing to death in their own beds every day. Are you ready to learn the truth about what was really hidden behind the high ceilings and huge windows of Victorian living rooms? The first thing any resident of a mansion encountered when waking up on a winter morning was the piercing, absolute cold. The temperature in the bedrooms often dropped to such low levels that the water in the wash jug would freeze overnight. This was not a sign of poverty or neglect, but was considered the absolute norm even for the wealthiest families in the empire. The architecture of the time prioritized visual grandeur and scale, completely ignoring the laws of thermodynamics and heat conservation. The huge single-pane windows, of which the architects were so proud, acted as powerful coolers, instantly releasing what little heat there was to the street. Fireplaces, which we are accustomed to considering a symbol of comfort, were in fact extremely inefficient sources of heat for such gigantic rooms. The design of an open hearth is such that most of the hot air escapes directly into the chimney without lingering in the room. Moreover, the powerful draft created by a burning fireplace literally sucked the already heated air out of the room, replacing it with an icy draft from the cracks. A person sitting by the fire experienced a strange sensation. Their face and hands were burning with heat, while their back was freezing. In order to retain some warmth, it was necessary to use special screens and heavy furniture with high backs, creating a kind of room within a room. Drafts were a constant companion in Victorian homes, blowing through long corridors and grand staircases. Doors to rooms were kept tightly closed, but icy air still seeped through keyholes and cracks under the threshold. To combat this phenomenon, special heavy fabric rolls filled with sand or wool were placed under the doors. Curtains on windows and doors also served a purely utilitarian function of insulation rather than decoration. The fabrics were chosen to be as dense and heavy as possible, often in several layers, to create at least some barrier between the living space and the cold street. The clothing of the inhabitants of the house was a direct reflection of the temperature inside. Even at home, people wore several layers of woolen underwear, vests, thick frock coats, and shawls. Women's dresses were sewn from thick fabrics, and the number of petticoats helped to retain body heat, similar to a thermos. Taking off gloves indoors was often uncomfortable, as the metal and wooden surfaces of the furniture remained icy to the touch. People had to sleep in nightcaps and long flannel shirts, preheating their beds with copper hot water bottles filled with coals. The bathroom, if there was one in the house, was a separate test of fortitude. Often finished with cold marble or tile, it cooled faster than the other rooms. Taking a bath required complex logistics and preparation to ensure that the water did not cool down before the person had time to get in. Often, the washing procedure was carried out directly in the bedroom by the fireplace, using portable bathtubs to minimize the time spent in the cold. Hot water had to be carried in buckets from the kitchen, located in the basement, which made the process long and laborious. The floors in the corridors and halls were often covered with stone slabs or tiles, which accumulated cold. Walking on such a floor, even in indoor shoes, was unpleasant, so carpets were used everywhere in the living rooms. Carpets were layered on top of each other, covering almost every inch of the wooden floor. It was not so much a matter of style as a desperate attempt to insulate the room from drafts coming from the basement. The thicker the pile of the carpet, the richer the house was considered to be, and the warmer it was to be in. Huge entrance halls with staircases leading to the upper floors posed a particular problem. According to the laws of physics, warm air rose, accumulating under the ceilings of the upper floors, where no one lived. Downstairs, where most of the living took place, it was always damp and cold. Heating these passageways was practically impossible and ruinously expensive. Residents tried to cross these spaces as quickly as possible, running from one heated room to another. Winter evenings in such a house turned into a struggle for a place by the fire. The family gathered in one, the warmest living room, huddling around the only source of heat. The rest of the house was plunged into icy silence until the next morning. Going to your bedroom meant leaving your comfort zone and returning to the cold. This constant struggle with the cold shaped a particular way of life and habits. People learned to value warmth as the highest good, rather than something to be taken for granted. Comfort was a privilege that had to be paid for with a lot of money and effort. A cold house dictated its own rules of behavior, clothing, and even furniture design. Do you think you could survive even one winter in such conditions without modern central heating? Share your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters. Want to know a secret that will change your perception of privacy? Victorian mansions were designed so that their owners would never cross paths with those who served them. It was a complex engineering and architectural challenge to make a huge staff of servants completely invisible. The house was literally divided into two parallel universes that existed in the same space but in different dimensions. Separate staircases, corridors, and passageways were built, hidden in the thickness of the walls or behind inconspicuous doors. The main divider between these worlds was the famous door covered with green cloth. It not only visually separated the master's quarters from the servants' quarters, but also served as sound insulation. Behind this door there was a flurry of activity. Shoes were cleaned, coal was carried, water was heated, and silver was polished. But as soon as the door opened, only silence and perfect order penetrated the master's quarters. The servant had to appear at the right moment, perform the task, and disappear, as if dissolving into thin air. The layout of the house provided for strict zoning. The kitchen and utility rooms were located in the basement or ground floor. This was done so that the smells of cooking and the noise of work did not reach the upper floors. Food was lifted by special elevators or carried up narrow, steep stairs. This journey was made hundreds of times a day, requiring incredible endurance from the staff. Any mistake, a broken plate or spilled soup on the stairs, was a disaster. The corridors for the servants were narrow, dark, and devoid of decoration, in contrast to the ceremonial halls. The walls here were painted in practical dark colors so that dirt from coal and soot would not be visible. There were no carpets, only bare boards or stone, so that footsteps could be heard and no one could sneak up unnoticed. This asceticism emphasized the status of those who used these passageways. There was a strict system of signals that replaced direct communication. In the service room, there was a huge board with bells, each of which corresponded to a specific room. The ringing of the bell activated a mechanism, and the servant had to immediately determine where the call was coming from. Distinguishing the tone and duration of the ring was an art that took years to learn. Even cleaning the rooms was done on a strict schedule when the owners were not at home. The maid had to come in, tidy up, light the fireplace, and leave without being noticed. If the owner suddenly entered the room, the maid was obliged to turn to face the wall and freeze, becoming part of the interior. Direct eye contact was considered a violation of subordination and rudeness. There were also specific routes for moving dirty laundry, coal, and water. No one was supposed to see a bucket of slop or a basket of dirty shirts in the front hall. All unsightly aspects of daily life were carefully concealed. The house had to look as if it was kept tidy by itself, as if by magic. Nightlife in the house was also strictly regulated. Servants slept in the attic, in the coldest and most uncomfortable rooms. They had their own separate entrances and exits so that even on their days off, they would not be seen by their masters. Male and female servants lived in different wings and communication between them was strictly controlled. This system of invisibility required iron discipline and constant tension. Any violation of the unwritten rules was punishable by dismissal without recommendation. Life in such a house was like serving in the army, where everyone knew their place and their role. Surprisingly, it was this complex system of separation that created the feeling of impeccable comfort that the Victorian era was so proud of. Do you think such strict segregation was justified for the sake of domestic convenience? Guess how long it took to heat one such house during the winter? The answer lies in the tons of black gold that a Victorian mansion consumed every day. Coal was the lifeblood of the house, its main resource and its main curse. Huge fuel bills could ruin even a wealthy family if the winter was particularly harsh. The basement of the house was turned into a veritable coal warehouse where supplies were stored for several months. Delivering coal to the rooms was hard physical labor that never stopped. Special servants began their day long before dawn, filling heavy metal buckets in the basement. Each bucket weighed a lot, and they had to be carried up to the second, third, or fourth floor via narrow staircases. Up to half a ton of coal could be used to heat a large house in a day. This meant hundreds of trips up and down the stairs, wearing out knees and backs. Coal dust was an omnipresent enemy, penetrating the most remote corners of the house. Despite all precautions, fine black dust settled on expensive wallpaper, velvet furniture, and snow-white tablecloths. Fighting this dust took up the lion's share of the maid's time. Every morning began with surfaces being wiped down and carpets being cleaned of soot. It was a never-ending war in which cleanliness always lost. Fireplaces required not only fuel, but also constant care and cleaning. Raking out ashes and cleaning grates and chimneys was dirty and laborious work. If the chimney became clogged with soot, it threatened not only to fill the rooms with smoke, but also to cause a fire. Chimney sweeps were frequent visitors, and their work was considered a necessary precaution against disaster. The quality of coal was also of great importance for the comfort of the residents. Cheap coal produced little heat, a lot of smoke, and an unpleasant sulfur smell. Wealthy households bought only the best grades, which burned evenly and cleanly. However, even the most expensive coal did not save them from the need to constantly monitor the fire. Each living room had a special box for coal, a coal box, which was often a work of art. It concealed the dirty fuel, turning it into an element of the interior. Fire tongs and a poker were always kept nearby so that the owner or servant could adjust the logs. The ability to properly light and maintain a fire was considered an important skill. At night, when the fireplaces burned out, the house quickly cooled down. In the morning, the servants had to light the fire before the owners got out of bed. This required precision and quickness, because waking up in a cold room was considered bad form. The sound of a match striking and the crackling of burning wood were the first sounds of the new day. Coal expenses were carefully recorded in the house books and monitored by the manager. Any overpayment or overspending led to serious investigations. Saving fuel was an obsession, so fireplaces in unused rooms were never lit. These dead zones of the house remained closed for months. Coal even dictated the fashion for colors in interior design. Dark, rich tones of wallpaper and upholstery became popular precisely because coal soot was less noticeable on them. Only those who had an army of servants for daily cleaning could afford light-colored interiors. Thus, the comfort of the Victorian home was supported by the coal industry. Behind the warm glow of the fireplace lay hard work, dirt, and enormous amounts of money. If you enjoyed this fact, please consider liking this video. What if I showed you a time machine that would take us back to an era where light killed slowly and silently? Imagine a luxurious Victorian mansion bathed in bright light, which at the time seemed to be the pinnacle of progress. Before the advent of electricity, gas was the main source of lighting in large houses. It was a real breakthrough that changed the lives of millions of people. Gas lamps provided bright, even, and powerful light, which was a welcome improvement over the dim and flickering light of wax candles or oil lamps. It was a real technological miracle that allowed people to read small print, play cards, and entertain guests late into the night. For the first time, people were able to live and work fully after sunset without straining their eyes. Cities and homes were transformed, and centuries of darkness receded. However, this rapid technological progress came at an incredibly high price to people's health. The inhabitants of that era had no idea that they were slowly poisoning themselves in their pursuit of comfort. The gas used for lighting in the 19th century was not the clean natural gas we are accustomed to today. It was so-called coal gas, produced in special factories by heating coal. It contained a huge amount of harmful impurities, including sulfur, ammonia, and carbon monoxide. Purification technologies at the time were imperfect, and all these substances inevitably found their way into living spaces. It was a veritable chemical bomb brought right into living rooms and bedrooms. When burned, this fuel released not only the desired light into the air, but also a whole cocktail of toxic substances and decay products. By evening, the air in the rooms became unbearably heavy, stuffy, and stale. Residents often complained of constant migraines, stinging eyes, and a sore throat. But few people associated these symptoms with the beautiful lamps on the walls. People simply got used to living in conditions of mild but constant poisoning. Ventilation in old houses was not designed for such active oxygen consumption inside closed rooms. Windows were often kept tightly closed to conserve precious heat from fireplaces. In such conditions, gas horns burned oxygen at an incredible rate, working like powerful pumps. One gas burner consumed as much oxygen as several adults needed to breathe. This turned the crowded ballroom into a slow-acting gas chamber. The first victims of this stifling atmosphere were houseplants, which were very popular in Victorian interiors. Delicate ferns and potted palms began to turn yellow and wither within days of being placed in a gas-filled room. Freshly cut bouquets of flowers died and fell apart before the end of the party. Gardeners had to constantly replace plants, creating the illusion of a blooming garden in a poisoned house. It was a clear indicator of danger that many chose to ignore. The people themselves also suffered, feeling constant chronic fatigue, apathy, and drowsiness. The famous pallor of the ladies of that era was often the result not only of fashion, but also of oxygen deprivation. Frequent fainting spells, which were attributed to tight corsets, were largely caused by a lack of fresh air. The inhabitants of the mansions blamed their ailments on changes in the weather, magnetic storms, or weak nerves. It never occurred to them that the source of their troubles was hanging right above their heads. In addition to the chemical threat, the open flames of gas burners were a source of constant and terrible fire hazard. Unlike candles, gas was supplied under pressure and burned high and bright, often without protective glass. The long, lush dresses of the ladies, supported by crinolines, took up a lot of space and could easily touch the fire. Light lace curtains and paper wallpaper could catch fire from the slightest draft that swayed the flame. One spark was enough to turn a room full of textiles and wood into a fiery trap. Newspapers of the time regularly published frighteningly detailed accounts of tragic incidents at balls and receptions. They described stories of dancing girls' dresses catching fire from low-hanging chandeliers or wall sconces. Extinguishing such fires was extremely difficult due to the abundance of fabric and the panic of the guests. The fear of fire was a constant background feeling in the life of any city dweller. People lived as if on a powder keg, but could not give up light. Gas also mercilessly ruined expensive interiors, the creation and decoration of which cost entire fortunes. Combustion products, mixing with moisture in the air, formed corrosive compounds that settled everywhere. Ceilings quickly became covered with black, greasy soot stains that were very difficult to wash off. Magnificent gilded moldings darkened and lost their luster, turning into a dirty mass. The owners had to undertake costly cosmetic repairs much more often than they would have liked. Sometimes such a negligence led to catastrophic explosions that could destroy part of a building or an entire floor. Gas accumulated in basements or cavities between walls, waiting for any spark. Searching for leaks with an open flame was a common, though insane from our point of view, practice. Homeowners or servants would follow the smell with a candle in hand to find the source of the leak. Often, this was the last thing they did in their lives. The transition to electricity at the end of the era was met with great relief by many, but also with a fair amount of mistrust. People accustomed to living with fire feared invisible electricity, no less than visible flames. There were rumors that electricity could leak from a socket and kill everyone in the room. It took time to convince society of the safety of the new technology, but it was the electric light bulb that ultimately saved people. The history of gaslighting is a striking example of how comfort was achieved through enormous risk. People consciously breathed poison and exposed themselves to danger for the sake of extending daylight hours by a couple of hours. They sacrificed their health for the sake of reading books and socializing. We often judge our ancestors, but sometimes we ourselves make compromises for the sake of technology. Would you risk using such lighting for the sake of atmosphere? There was no room for spontaneity in the life of a Victorian gentleman or lady. The entire day was scheduled down to the minute and governed by a strict set of rules, the violation of which was tantamount to social suicide. Etiquette regulated not only behavior in society, but also the most intimate moments of home life. Even when alone, a person could not relax and had to keep up appearances. The morning began with a dressing ritual that could take up to an hour. It was unacceptable to go to breakfast in a bathrobe or looking unkempt. There was a dress code for every meal. Breakfast, lunch, tea, dinner, all required a change of clothes. A lady could change her clothes up to 5 or 6 times a day, which in itself was exhausting work. Table manners were a separate science that was instilled from an early age. A straight back, elbows pressed against the body, the correct use of dozens of types of cutlery. There were special forks for oysters, knives for fish, spoons for salt. A mistake in choosing the right cutlery could become a subject of ridicule and discussion. Topics of conversation were also strictly regulated. It was forbidden to discuss illness, money, politics, or servants at the table. Conversation had to be light, pleasant, and avoid controversial issues. Silence was considered awkward, and loud laughter was considered vulgar. Relationships between family members were formalized. Spouses often addressed each other formally or by title, especially in the presence of strangers or servants. Showing strong emotions was considered a sign of weakness and poor upbringing. Restraint was the main virtue. Receiving guests was a complex ceremony. Calling cards, visiting hours, length of stay, everything was spelled out in the rules. You couldn't just drop in on a friend for tea without warning. Violating the boundaries of privacy was punishable by exclusion from the social circle. Even the posture in which a person sat in a chair was important. A lady could not cross her legs and a gentleman could not slouch. The furniture of that time, with its straight backs, helped to maintain good posture but did not allow for relaxation. Letters were written according to specific templates, using approved wording. The paper, ink, and handwriting all spoke to the status and upbringing of the sender. A careless letter could offend the recipient. This dictatorship of etiquette created an invisible corset that constrained not only the body but also the soul. Life turned into an endless performance where everyone played their part. Sincerity was sacrificed to propriety. These rules seemed to create harmony, but in reality often led to neuroses and hidden conflicts. People lived in a golden cage of conventions from which there was no escape. Are you ready for the shocking truth about hygiene? While the facades of mansions gleamed with cleanliness, the issue of personal hygiene and sewage inside the house was often dealt with in a very primitive way. The Victorian era was a time when the understanding of germs had already emerged, but technology had not yet caught up with science. A mansion might look like a palace, but it did not smell regal inside. The problem of waste disposal was one of the most pressing engineering challenges of the time. The first water closets, which appeared in wealthy homes, were often imperfect. The flushing systems did not work well, and water seals did not always cope with the odors from the sewer pipes. Ventilation of sewer risers was often absent, and foul-smelling gases penetrated back into the living quarters. This was called sewer gas and was feared as a source of disease. To hide the pipes and mechanisms, they were often encased in wooden boxes decorated to look like furniture. This looked aesthetically pleasing, but created ideal conditions for rot and dampness inside the paneling. The wood absorbed moisture and odors, becoming a breeding ground for mold. Getting to a leaky pipe for repair was a real problem, requiring half the room to be dismantled. Cesspools, which were still used in many homes, required regular cleaning. This was done by nighttime sewage workers, whose work was necessary but despised. The smell during this procedure spread throughout the neighborhood, forcing residents to keep their windows tightly closed. Personal hygiene was also a difficult process. A daily shower was an unaffordable luxury. People washed themselves in parts, using a basin and a jug of water. A full immersion in the bath was considered a therapeutic procedure and was not done very often. The lack of hot water made every wash a logistical operation. Laundry was another household nightmare. Huge amounts of clothing, bedding, and tablecloths had to be boiled, bleached, and ironed. Houses had special laundry rooms filled with steam, heat, and the smell of lye. It was hard physical work that took up several days a week. The fight against dust and dirt was constant. City streets were covered with soot and manure, which were brought into the house on shoes and clothes. Shoe scrapers were always placed at the entrance to the house, and rugs lay in the hall. Changing from outdoor shoes to indoor shoes was not just a tradition, but a sanitary necessity. Rooms were ventilated by simply opening the windows, which was not always a good idea in the smoggy conditions of industrial cities. Along with fresh air, soot and smoke flew into the room. Therefore, windows were often kept closed, preferring stale air to dirty air. Lead water pipes also posed a hidden threat. Lead slowly poisoned the water, causing chronic diseases. People at that time were unaware of this and continued to use the convenient but dangerous system. Thus, behind the outward glamour lay a constant struggle with unsanitary conditions. Technical progress brought convenience, but it also created new problems. How do you think people coped with odors without modern air fresheners? The female half of the house, the boudoir and the mistress's bedroom, was often imagined as a realm of bliss and comfort. However, in reality, it was a place where daily torture was inflicted by fashion and social expectations. The life of a Victorian lady was constrained not only by etiquette, but also by literal physical restraints. Clothing turned women into beautiful statues, almost deprived of the ability to move and breathe freely. The corset was the main instrument of this transformation. Tightly laced whalebone compressed the ribs, deformed the internal organs, and made breathing difficult. Ladies fainting was not so much a sign of a delicate constitution as a direct consequence of oxygen deprivation. This armor could only be removed in the bedroom, and this moment was the most eagerly awaited of the whole day. Crinolines and bustles, structures that gave dresses volume, made women immobile. Passing through a narrow doorway, sitting in a carriage, or simply bending over was a difficult task that required skill. Skirts swept the floor, collecting dust and dirt, and their weight could reach several kilograms. Wearing all this from morning to night required considerable physical endurance. Women spent hours in front of the mirror in their boudoirs, creating intricate hairstyles. Hair was back-combed, curled with hot tongs, and styled into heavy knots. The use of pins, combs, and hairpieces created additional strain on the head. Headaches were a frequent companion of beauties. The boudoir was also a place of isolation. Women were expected to spend their time there embroidering, reading, or writing letters. Active pursuits were not encouraged. It was a golden cage lined with silk, where time passed slowly and sluggishly. Even during pregnancy, women were not exempt from wearing a corset, albeit one of a special design. Society demanded that they hide their interesting condition for as long as possible. They only stopped going out in public in the very late stages of pregnancy. The furniture in the boudoir was chosen to match the clothing, elegant but uncomfortable. Recamier allowed women to recline, as sitting upright in a corset was tiring. Everything around them emphasized women's fragility and dependence. Mirrors placed everywhere served as a constant reminder of the need to control one's appearance. Any crease in a dress or stray curl had to be corrected immediately. The ideal image was the main goal of existence. This room was a symbol of the husband's status, a showcase of his wealth, where his wife was the main exhibit. The beauty of the interiors and outfits came at the price of personal freedom and physical comfort. In a huge mansion, there was a clear and unshakable division between male and female zones, which lived by their own rules. In contrast to the cozy, bright boudoir of the hostess, filled with the scent of perfume, there were always areas in the house that were strictly for men. These traditionally included the owner's private office, the extensive library, and the closed smoking room. These were the only places in the entire house where the owner could feel relatively free from the strict constraints of social etiquette. Here, a man ceased to be just a gallant gentleman and became the absolute ruler of his world. The study was rightly considered the main command center from which the entire estate and family finances were managed. It was here that the owner spent his morning hours sorting through mail and reviewing accounts from suppliers. This room housed the most important documents, deeds, wills, and promissory notes. It was here that intense business negotiations with managers took place and key decisions were made that determined the well-being of the family. The smoking room was a unique invention of the era, designed to solve the delicate problem of smell. Tobacco smoke was considered vulgar and unacceptable in the presence of ladies, and their dresses easily absorbed foreign odors. Therefore, a separate, well-insulated room with a powerful extractor fan or fireplace was set aside for smoking. This allowed gentlemen to enjoy their cigars without fear of causing discontent among the female members of the household. It was here that men could relax and change out of their tight, formal tailcoats into more comfortable clothes. They wore special smoking jackets made of velvet or silk, which protected their main clothes from ash and smell. In this room, they could stretch their legs by the fire and engage in uncensored conversation. Here they discussed the latest political news, stock market reports, and scandals that were not supposed to be mentioned in the living room. It was a private club right inside their own home. Nevertheless, the library also served an important representative function for the outside world. It was customary to receive important business partners and high-ranking guests here, demonstrating one's erudition and impeccable taste. The library's atmosphere set a serious tone and emphasized the host's importance in society. Globes, antique maps on the walls, and busts of philosophers complemented this image of an intellectual sanctuary. The temperature in these men's rooms was always kept slightly higher than in other living quarters and corridors. This was because men spent a lot of time here in a sedentary state, sitting at a table or in an armchair. In the reception rooms, people moved around or danced more often, but here a different level of comfort was required. Therefore, the servants made sure that there were no drafts in the men's areas. The fireplaces here were lit almost constantly, even when it was not too cold outside. Armchairs were strategically placed to maximize the heat from the fire and create cozy areas for conversation. Furniture with high backs and ears was often used to protect the sitter from cold drafts. The comfort of the host and his guests was a priority when furnishing these rooms. Here, away from the eyes of impressionable ladies, were kept objects of male pride and passion. These could be extensive collections of cold steel or firearms, hung on the walls or displayed in showcases. Hunting trophies were often displayed here: stuffed birds, deer antlers, or the skins of exotic animals. These items, reminiscent of wild nature and danger, had no place in an elegant living room. These rooms also became a refuge for the owner's scientific hobbies, whether astronomy, numismatics, or archaeology. Here there could be microscopes, telescopes, or cabinets with collections of minerals and rare insects. It was a space for personal expression, inaccessible in the formal halls where everything was subject to fashion. Here, a man could be an explorer and a traveler without leaving home. The billiard room was also unquestionably considered male territory and was an important part of leisure time. Billiards was an incredibly popular pastime after a hearty lunch or dinner. It allowed men to stretch their legs, get up from the table, and demonstrate their dexterity and eye for detail. Serious passions ran high around the billiard table. Bets were made, and large sums of money were lost. The servants allowed into this holy of holies were most often exclusively men. Usually it was the master's personal valet or the senior butler who enjoyed complete trust. Female servants had absolutely no business here. Their presence was considered inappropriate and distracting. Maids were only allowed to enter early in the morning, while the master was still asleep, to tidy up and clean the fireplace. Such strict selection of personnel further emphasized the masculine enclosed nature of the space. Male servants knew how to be inconspicuous shadows, pouring brandy and serving fresh newspapers at the right time. They knew their master's habits down to the smallest detail and knew how to keep silent about what they saw and heard. This created a feeling of complete privacy and security. It was within the walls of the study and library that fateful decisions were made that would affect generations to come. Here, the terms of children's marriage contracts, the size of dowries, and advantageous matches were discussed. Serious investments, land purchases, and the construction of new factories or railways were planned here. Political alliances were also forged and election campaign strategies discussed. The walls of these rooms heard secrets that were never meant to leave the mansion. Here, card debts were confessed, illegitimate children were hidden, and decisions were made on how to cover up a brewing scandal. It was the real brain center of the house, where real power was exercised without unnecessary noise. Everything that happened behind the closed doors of the men's quarters remained there forever. The men's quarters were a kind of oasis of relative freedom in a world of endless social conventions. Here one could be oneself, take off the mask of propriety, and not play the tiresome role of the ideal head of the family. Here one could swear, drink an extra glass of wine, or simply sit in silence, staring into the fire. It was a place of psychological relief necessary for maintaining mental balance. But even this coveted freedom was severely limited by the walls of just one or two rooms in a huge house. Beyond the threshold of his study, a man had to live up to the expectations of society, his wife, and his children. His personal space was just a small island in an ocean of responsibilities and rituals, and this contrast made the time spent in the men's area especially valuable and meaningful. Supplying a huge mansion with food was a task comparable to supplying a small military garrison. A lot of food was needed, and it had to be fresh and varied. Refrigerators as we know them today did not exist, which made food storage a real puzzle. Pantries and ice houses were the most important strategic facilities in the house. An ice house was a deep room, often a separate building or a deep basement, filled with blocks of ice. Ice was brought in during the winter from lakes or purchased from special suppliers who brought it from Norway or North America. Straw and sawdust helped keep it cold even in the summer heat. This is where meat, fish, and butter were stored. Meat was purchased in carcasses or large cuts. It was cut up directly in the kitchen. Poultry was often delivered alive and kept in the backyard until needed. This guaranteed freshness, but added work for the cooks. Milk and cream were delivered daily by milkmen, as they soured quickly. Bread was baked at home or bought from the bakery every morning. The logistics of deliveries were continuous. If a supplier failed to deliver, it jeopardized the entire meal. Preserving was the only way to store vegetables and fruit for the winter. The pantry shelves were bursting with jars of pickles, jams, and compotes. Preparing these supplies took all summer and fall. It was a busy time for the kitchen staff. Spices, tea, coffee, and sugar were kept under lock and key. These products were expensive, and the hostess often personally handed them out to the cook by weight. The key to the tea box was a symbol of the power of the housekeeper or hostess. Theft in the kitchen was commonplace, and the fight against it was constant. Wine was stored in the wine cellar, where a specific temperature and humidity were maintained. The wine supply was the pride of the owner and could amount to thousands of bottles. Wine was recorded in a special book, and every bottle was accounted for. The menu was planned a week in advance so that all the necessary ingredients could be ordered. Seasonality, fasting, and guest visits were taken into account. Improvisation in the kitchen was not welcome. Everything had to go according to plan. Kitchen waste was enormous. What the hosts did not eat was eaten by the servants. What the servants did not eat was fed to animals or sold to junk dealers, fat, bones. Waste-free production was the norm at the time. This complex supply system ran like clockwork thanks to strict control and the experience of the staff. A disruption in supplies could ruin the reputation of the house as a hospitable place. The Victorian mansion was a living organism that was born, lived, and died with its era. By the end of the 19th century, this way of life began to rapidly collapse. Economic changes, rising labor costs, and the emergence of new technologies made maintaining such houses unprofitable. Huge palaces became a burden for their owners. The First World War put an end to the history of classic Victorian life. Male servants went to the front, women found work in factories. It became impossible to find staff willing to work 16 hours a day for food and shelter. The invisible army that had maintained comfort disappeared. Mansion owners were faced with a harsh reality. They did not know how to light fires, cook meals, or clean rooms themselves. Life in huge, cold halls without servants became a matter of survival. Many houses were sold, divided into apartments, or demolished. The advent of central heating, electricity, and running water made complex architecture with separate corridors and staircases unnecessary. Life became simpler and more democratic. The old rules of etiquette and zoning lost their meaning. However, the buildings themselves remained standing as monuments to a bygone era. Their brick walls remember the cold of winter nights, the smell of coal dust, and the quiet ringing of bells for servants. They hold the secrets of lives lived by strict rules in pursuit of an ideal. Today we look at these houses with nostalgia, admiring their beauty and style. But now you know the price that beauty came at. Behind the stucco and velvet lay tons of coal, the calloused hands of servants in endless cold. The Victorian mansion is a grand illusion of comfort, created at a time when man was trying to conquer space and time, but still depended on fire and water. It was an era of grand ambitions and everyday compromises. We walked through the floors and rooms, peeked behind green doors, and descended into the basements. This tour showed us the underside of luxury. The history of these houses teaches us to appreciate what we have today. Hot water from the tap, warm radiators, and washing machines are luxuries that Queen Victoria could only dream of. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Now you know that life in a Victorian mansion was far from the fairy tale we see in movies. It was a daily struggle with cold, dirt, and discomfort, wrapped up in a beautiful package of etiquette and architecture. The people of that time possessed incredible resilience and patience, creating comfort where it seemed impossible. What detail of Victorian life struck you the most? Was it the freezing cold bedrooms or the toxic gaslighting? Suggest topics for future videos you would like to see on our channel in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new historical investigations.